blockchain, technology, and the auto industry. Thank you all for coming. My name is Ingrid LaFleur. I am the Chief Community Officer of EOS Detroit. And we are hosting the Crypto Café all week. So we had What is EOS on Monday. On Tuesday, we looked at the decentralized application Pixios. And tomorrow, we're going to be talking about dynamic equity on that blockchain, which is a product that EOS Detroit is creating. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about token economics via a game. We're going to be playing a game so we can learn about token economics. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Please join us for all the other days. I see all the familiar faces from the other Crypto Cafe sessions. Thank you for returning. I really appreciate it. So today we're going to be in conversation with Mr. Robert Adams.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm just going to read his bio really quickly. So Robert L. Adams has over 25 years of executive management experience, making them possible happen with firms such as United Technologies Carrier, Otis and Ford. His entrepreneurial activities include successful clean tech startups, RPM, and Quanta Environmental Energy, as well as a number of successful building and engineering firms. He has engineering degrees from MIT and Purdue University and an MBA from the Ross School of Business, University of Michigan. He is currently the CEO of Progressive Web Apps. Do you pronounce that Powa?
Yes, we do.
That's awesome. So, Robert, tell me, why are you interested in blockchain technology? Or first of all, tell me, what is Powa first?
Yeah, as my user system, yeah, thank you. Yeah, we started this company about 6 years ago, and initially we were in the medical space, and we developed some really what we thought was leading edge technology in terms of being point-to-point secure messaging and collaboration. So we were a competitor of companies like Telegram, Strings, Whispers, and that kind of thing. And we morphed into the, if we will, enterprise environment. And then about a year ago, someone said, well, why don't you sell into automotive? And we said, well, I used to work in automotive, and I don't want to. But they says, no, if you look at the automotive space, I think you'll find that it's really ripe for disruption. And so a year ago, we looked at that, and we haven't regretted a day since then. You know, the thing about automotive is that as a sector by itself, it is the largest spend of anything, including healthcare. And it's highly concentrated. And that makes sense. You know, a typical purchase is about anywhere between $20,000 to $50,000. Yet if you look at the technologies employed in terms of the production, the distribution, and the actual selling of that product, it's about 20 years behind. And one of the things that we were really excited about employing blockchain technologies into our infrastructure is that from production standpoint, there is so much data that we have to collect at the, if you will, manufacturer level. And yet we rely on the manufacturers to report on themselves. For example, how many of you heard of the Volkswagen emission scandal? Right? Everybody in this room. And that was simply a case of a manufacturer lying about what its numbers were. And both the regulators as well as the general public has to take their word for what those numbers were. And one of the exciting things about blockchain is this is a way to keep everybody from production to sales honest about what's happening. So we're excited to be part of it. Our product called Power Card focuses on the dealer network, making what we call dealers two-click friendly. If I could give a plug to someone else's product, I'm trying to make car ownership and buying like Amazon. And so we just launched this product about 60, 90 days ago. A lot of traction in the Detroit area and as well as in Canada. And hopefully some of you will have an opportunity to see, you know, in the near future, things go well for us.
Okay, where do I begin? So when it comes to manufacturing, that phase of auto, what are the different types of ways that blockchain can be used? I know within, if you can give examples of like supply chain, what other data collection, that would be really.
Yeah, okay. So when you look at the production of a vehicle, you've got raw materials, and then you got processes to that raw materials. So even from the certification of what raw materials, like the steel, which is one of the things I bought when I was purchasing a Ford, I have to document that, okay? When you look at the actual manufacturing of the vehicle in terms of what goes into it, for example, everyone's familiar with the VIN number. Well, that VIN number captures everything about what supposedly happened with that car in the factory. That's a perfect use case of blockchain. Even things like, for example, I don't know, carriage bolts, torque bolts. One of the things that you have your engine, and it sits in a frame, and you have bolts that hold that engine in the car. Well, we have to certify that those were torqued to the proper specifications. If they're not torqued properly, there's a chance that that engine could fall out of the car. Not a good thing. But that's one of the little things that the manufacturer has to self-report on. And all these things could be wrapped up in the blockchain, a distributed ledger, where everybody can have a much more confidence and accessibility to that key data.
And I'm wondering, when a person buys a car, is there data collection happening there, or would there be? As they're driving it?
Absolutely. That telemetry is documented since 1984. We've been collecting that real-time data. Most of it's been used in terms of reporting and investigation of accidents. So if you're in a fatal accident or a very catastrophic accident, we can pull that data from the sort of the car's black box, and we can use it to analyze. And right now it's done to simply make sure that there's no manufacturing issues are being done. And in limited cases, it's being done to assess culpability in terms of what happened in the accident. Mm-hmm. But once again, this is something that through a distributed ledger methodology, blockchain particularly, we can make that accessible to all interested parties, without relying on one particular party to keep that information accurate. So going back to the Volkswagen example, if I'm a manufacturer and I have a systemic problem with one of my vehicles, do you think maybe I would fudge the numbers I report to the National Highway Safety and Transportation Administration? Do you think there's an incentive for me to delay reporting? And all those things take place every day. In fact, I can tell you firsthand, without identifying the company it was. Of course, you kind of mentioned it in my bio, but I can tell you firsthand that executives have discussions about the timing of when and what to report information. So we will literally look at this data and say, okay, do we have to report this right now? Or can we do a little more investigation? Are we sure it is correct? And this is our data, by the way. And so if we had a system that information could be collected, say, more real time, and particularly it could be distributed to multiple parties to be the reporting of that information, I think consumers, manufacturers, and everybody else would be better off. So that's why we're very, very excited about taking a little piece of using blockchain in terms of focusing our part at the customer level when we actually purchase the car.
Yeah, can you explain, Paula, a little bit more about that app especially?
Yeah. So what will happen is that when you buy a car or when you're looking at a car, there's all kinds of information that I can present to the end user, the customer, about that vehicle. Even from the basic stuff, like I'm sure everyone in this room has gone and gotten service and maintenance on a vehicle. And a real life example is that I was just getting service on my vehicle, and I've been to this dealership no less than 3 times, okay? And every time I come into the dealership, they ask me, do I know my VIN number? Okay? If you get service at, say, a Ford store on a Ford vehicle, and you go to the Ford store in a local town, there's only a 50-50 chance that they're going to be able to pull up your service records, and that's the same store. Now imagine if you were getting service at your local mechanic. What are the chances of him having access to that data? So one of the first use cases that we're very excited about with our app is that it's going to allow you to pull all those service records and have that portability on your phone. So you don't have to rely on the dealer to look up something, even though they should have it, by the way. I will say that first of all. But you won't have to rely on the dealer to pull out your record, your history of what's happening with your particular vehicle. You'll be able to have that data, and it'll be housed in our cloud, And that's something that the dealers can tap in, and we interface directly with all of the what we call DMS systems, service management systems, so they'll be able to pull that stuff, even though most of them should already have it. Yeah. And that's just one of the small little things that we can do for you as a consumer if you're using the app.
Yeah, I was wondering how much the public will have access and how much control we have over our own data that we're generating when we're driving a car, when servicing a car, just owning that car, right? And so we're generating data which should always be owned by us, at least that's the industry standard in blockchain. Brian, you had a question? Hmm.
That's exactly was our quote attempted business model, and we end up getting crushed by the big players. There are some vested parties that have their own solutions for themselves in medical. That's going to make that a more difficult, if you will, end game than what we expected to see in automotive. And so far, that hypothesis has been proven correct. It's more comprehensive than that. Well, I don't look at it any particular use, but clearly that would be one of the cases. I look at that we're just agnostic in terms of what the dealer wants to do in terms of their business model, what the end parties want to do. We just believe that everyone should have access to their data, to your point. And one of the things that may surprise some of you is that there's a lot more data captured in your vehicle right now than you possibly can imagine. Mm. And all of it's being sold and monetized by other parties without compensating you, and it's your data. And so our end goal, if you would like to see for the industry, is that we want the housing of that data distributed. We want the end users, meaning the people who generate the data, to have access to it, and we want there to be some sort of equitable sharing for the monetization of that data, so to speak. So one of the things being located in Detroit, we see a number of different startups, and we collaborate with a number of different startups related to this. And one of the hottest sectors, if you will, is in terms of what's happening in the insurance market. Mm-hmm. So now we're able to really precisely look at what you're driving and what you're doing with the vehicle. I can get a better assessment of the risk. Well, unfortunately, that monetization and that sharing of that is happening right now. It's with your consent because you gave a blanket consent somewhere along the line. You didn't understand that. But the monetization of that is happening right now without sharing those savings necessarily to you directly.
I have a little story about that. Progressive Insurance. You get a discount if you have an app on your phone that monitors your driving, or this plug-in into your car. But the thing, I ended up calling them, like, you don't know if who's driving the car, and you don't know if when it's on my phone, if I'm in an Uber or not. And so you're just monitoring movement, basically, and you're assuming it's me who's driving the car. And I can be penalized. So if I end up taking a bunch of Ubers one month and they're like driving fast, then my insurance literally will go up and it won't change. It doesn't matter if I'm better or not. And so, that is what we're talking about. It's like this, the data is used against me, actually. I mean, it could benefit me if I'm a really good driver and it could lower my insurance rate, but I doubt that. So, I think, that I think it's very interesting because I didn't even understand that insurance companies were collecting data in that way. It was a very recent thing for me. Anybody have any other questions? I'm curious, are there any companies right now, car companies, that are actually implementing blockchain technology into their, do you know?
There's been a couple things they've been experimenting with by at least 3 of the OEMs, but they haven't deployed anything as of yet. I think one of the problems that you have, without hopefully hit me if I get into much political commentary, but one of the problems that you have is that the OEMs are notoriously bad at working together.
OEM?
Yes. Ford, GM,
Got it.
FC. I mean, they're notoriously bad at working together. There's 75 years of bad blood that no one trusts anyone, you know, and so the obvious solution for many of the things we talked about would be some sort of OEM blockchain that we could use for housing this data, even perhaps for doing some kind of monetization of certain things that would influence, if not control, the sharing of that data, like for insurance and other financial parties that have a vested interest in what's happening with you and your vehicle. But that's not happening. That's just simply not happening. So absence of somebody from a federal or state level facilitating that, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So the short answer to your question is yes. The more complete answer is no, nothing of any substance is coming forth. Because you really need all the manufacturers to cooperate with this to make sense, right?
So you're saying there could be policy made around this that would kind of make car manufacturers to, I don't know, implement blockchain in a certain way?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, that's the politics behind it. We really need some sort of regulatory, state, federal, or both, to kind of make them work together, put some framework for having all the sharing of information, because left to their own devices, they're not going to cooperate. And to really make it effective, I need all the OEMs to participate. I need all the tier ones to participate. You know, otherwise it's going to be a more, if you will, newfangled way of doing things what we did in the past, where everybody self-reports and everybody interprets their own data to suit their purposes, to put it politely.
I'm wondering about small manufacturers that sell to the big three, for instance, in the Detroit area, in terms of supply chains. I'm just curious, like, what does it take for them to join this supply chain? Is that a costly thing in terms of time, or I'm just curious, like, what does that process look like?
Yeah, we would call that being one of the tiers. So you would have the OEM, the manufacturer, then we have a tier one that would supply into it, like Lear is a tier one, and you have people to supply into Lear, we call them tier twos, and the people supplying to tier twos, tier threes. You know, and to be a tier one, it is a very expensive and difficult process. Almost, I won't say impossible, exceptionally difficult. And I can tell you firsthand, because I used to administer our supply base, there has been an active effort over the last 20, 25 years to reduce the number of tier ones. Yeah.
Why?
Well, that aggregation, your question was why, yeah. Well, that aggregation makes it easier for me to do business. One of the things that we have in the automotive industry is what we call distributed liability, okay? And so if something goes wrong, I have people with financial resources within my supply base that I can share that risk with. You know, so case in point, we're in the Lear Innovation Center. I remember I was on the other side of this as a tier one, and we had a problem with electrical switch. It was the company was called UT Automotive at the time. Lear bought it from us because of this very issue, and it cost us at United Technologies about $163 million in terms of what we had to settle that year for that switch. And I was actually in the meeting where our CEO, chairman, said, "That's it. We're out of automotive." You know, because contractually we were liable, or jointly liable, for these issues. And so when you ask your question, well, if I'm, Rick and Bob in their garage, you're not going to be a tier one. You know, you simply don't have the balance sheet or the financial resources that you can convince someone like me at the OEM level that I can share the risk of this with you. Because and that's why you see consolidation and ongoing consolidation more and more over the last 10 years. It's because of that. You have to be bigger in order to absorb the financial liability that I, as an OEM, want you to be able to take on should there be a problem. And that's going to be particularly important as we started looking about what we're doing on the mobility ecosystem, and we're bringing on all these wonderful new technologies. Well, there's risk with that. You know, we're talking about autonomous vehicles, right? I mean, yeah, we proved it out. Yeah, we tested it out. Yeah, we've been working on this for 20 plus years, but there's a risk with that, you know? So I only want partners who have the financial wherewithal to share the risk because I know there's going to be issues. I know there's going to be financial responsibility as a result of me deploying that technology.
Any other questions? Yes.
So this is more technical question. Are you guys using Ethereum, Hyperledger? What blockchain technology are you using?
Yeah, so what we did, we originally worked our, if we will, our infrastructure in this traditional SQL framework. And then last year, we started to move to NoSQL, getting a more flat architecture faster. So we're now in the process of converting into something. Obviously, we're looking at EOS. I mean, that's the way we're, yeah, I mean, that's the way we're going. But there's still a lot of heavy lifting to do there. You know, one of the things that's important as we start to deploy this with our dealers who are our ultimate customers. Well, I guess you and the general public is our ultimate customers. But one of the things that's been interesting as we launched the beta product, if you will, the pilot product, the dealers themselves have been coming up with new things that they want to have done. You know, they're like, well, you know, this is how we run our business. And some of these things are even beyond what we initially anticipated with working with the end users. For example, I was with a dealer last week, and one of the things is just, well, we really need two apps. We need an app for our customer, and we need an app internally because we work with other dealers and we work with other repair shops. And we need to be able to have a lot of these problems solved amongst ourselves that are different, you know? And so when you start talking about, well, gee, how do you deploy that with blockchain and who needs to share what and how this information is going to be housed, we've got to rethink some things. So the short answer to your question is, we're looking at EOS. We're not quite there yet. But the reason we're not there yet is that we've been overwhelmed with the response and the amount of interest that the dealership community has in terms of using this. One other point I would make, if you, at one of the, every year that the dealers, National North America Association of Dealers, they have a show. And one of the key things at their show, one of the feature presentations at their show was blockchain for dealers. So there's a lot of interest in blockchain within the dealership level. It's just that we're in the very early stages of what makes practical sense and the timing and the applications for it. So.
Just want to ask quickly, why are you looking at EOS?
I think that was a loaded question. Yeah. The big thing for us is that we wanted something who understood that to make a blockchain successful, it has to be equitable. You had to have diversity of industries that supported it, and you had to have diversity of players, you know, and EOS certainly fits all those things. You know, one of the exciting things about it is that if you look at other technologies, they're more focused on how they can monetize it in a particular sense of way. And EOS is more open in terms of looking at those possibilities. Because I think it's, as any designer or engineer knows, you may come in there with preconceived notions about what you think works, but until you actually deploy it amongst customers, you don't know that, just in this particular case. You know, and that's why we're pretty excited to work with EOS for that very reason, is that every day we talk to a customer, they're like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. Well, I'm going to do that, you know, so.
Awesome, great answer. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
Okay, so
You can repeat the question.
yeah, the question was what solutions automotive trying to use blockchain for? The biggest issue and the low-hanging fruit, but the low-hanging fruit is the most difficult issue for them, is the documentation of what happens at your vehicle from manufacturer to sell. Okay? Even things simply like that little sticker they put on the car, we're required by law to do that. Things like the odometer, we're required by law to do that. These are perfect use cases where we could have that information captured multiple places. So, and in case of the mileage of a vehicle, it would be one of those things that when you buy a vehicle, it would be very easy to go into the ledger and verify what was updated at that last service for that. or what's been updated by the black box in there, because we can do that real time, and we are doing that real time in many cases. You know, one of the things that, to be self-serving, is that when we talk to like the dealers that do all the majority of the service on the vehicles, one of the things is that they know is that they already know your mileage before you tell them. They have that accessibility. So they have a very, very good idea what's happening to your vehicle, because that stuff is already being reported before you go into the dealership. You know, and so to your point, that's the type of data that we are already capturing in real time. That's the type of data that I think if you can use a distributed encrypted ledger to give everybody who has a vested interest access to. And that's why I'm very excited about the blockchain capabilities in automotive. But to my point earlier, it's been very difficult for the OEMs by themselves to do it alone, right? It really needs all of them to cooperate. I think you really need some sort of regulatory framework that's going to dictate the terms of that cooperation to really be effective. You know, because certainly you don't want FCA blockchain for, you know, Jeeps, or Ford's blockchain just for Ford. You know, you're going to be back more to the same, just in a little more automated fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, the question was, could it become an SAE standard? I think it could even go beyond that. I think you need some sort of SAE standardization, and you need some sort of adjudication, perhaps by SAE directly, although they tend to avoid it doing those things before. So maybe it will be the SAE, blockchain association, a nonprofit that will be responsible for vetting through these issues. But ultimately, I think you need that type of framework to get the kind of real results that everyone's expecting.
To get it started, did anybody? Brian.
So the question was about providing equity and transparency, and that would make it fair. You know, and as a personal level, I agree with you. However, with the current state of affairs, there's so much money to be made in terms of information is power. Case in point, you bring your vehicle into service, you know, and this is a system that's only been recently deployed, but I can tell when you bring that vehicle in, I can tell what the value is of that car when I wholesale it. I know the condition of the car. I know you as the owner of the car. I know your financial situation, okay? And I can make a determination up front about what vehicle I can put you in. And there are companies right now who sell that information to dealers, you know. And that's just a small little, very specific use case of how that asymmetry of information, as you call it, has money, you know. And so you think a dealer is willing to pay that person who can tell them those things $20 for a qualified lead all day long? You know, same thing related to how much you can, what vehicle you can afford. If I know that, I can say, hey, this person can afford this particular vehicle. They're looking to buy a vehicle. Is that worth $5 to you? We do that all day long. So there's a lot of things that would have to change in the current system that many people are getting literally fed off of in order to make what you say happen. And which is brings me back to my point without getting too political. That's why you're going to need some sort of regulatory authority to kind of cut through all that and say, I understand that you were doing this before and you were making money here, but we passed the law. This is the way it has to happen from now on.
I think it's a really intelligent conversation. It really has lots of content, use case, value proposition. I just find that conclusion about using the government to standardize something as it's going 180 degrees. When is the government going to be efficient, effective, innovative, or productive? If you would just want to, and especially with something that's so new,
Yeah.
we'd be still reacting to
Well, I think the point being, and I appreciate it, like I said, I warned you up front. I think the point about being political, but I think the point being is we know the one extreme of the model is not going to work. Okay, and I can go through example throughout the last 60 years when we know if the OEMs and their supply chain left to their own devices do not cooperate well. And I can agree with almost 100% of what you say, that left to the government, they're going to botch it too.
a little more of a dialogue.
Yeah.
The idea of what's happening is you got startup companies, all their own things. You got normally the legislative government controlled corporate liability requires you to be able to do it to take on the liability with the supply chain. Well, now there's people finding ways to go around it and be innovative and start small companies. And when you look at the economy as being a GM or a consumer economy, you know, what's the fact? 80% of the U.S. economy is companies smaller than 100. How do these companies participate in such a top-down dominant? To me, you're going in the wrong direction when you say, let's innovate with government regulation.
Yeah. And I think a very valid point, but not to make this the whole focus here. The point being is, if you look at the way the supply chain in automotive is, and I'm not making this up, you know, we've got a very defined tier structure. And even to the point that some of these great and new technologies are being deployed, I won't debate that, they're going through the tiers to do that. And unless they are cooperating, they're being captive entities, partnerships, ownerships through the tier structure, they're not getting deployed. And you know, I defy anyone in this room to name me a case where you're seeing a startup of 12 guys in a co-op space as a tier one in any automotive company, OEM. It just doesn't exist, and it won't exist for the variety of reasons we talked about earlier.
Lou?
I would just add, though, I think there's opportunity. We heard a suggestion that perhaps another body could take it on, right? Not necessarily the government, but the Society of Automotive Engineers. There's similar work being done now around how you plug in your electric car, right? The SAE has a standard. I think Europe has a standard as well. But, you know, there are other opportunities, and I would look to the open source community as a model for creating those solutions. The value proposition is the data. We got a lot of data. Let's go find a way to do it. So that's a problem looking for a solution. You know, or a solution looking for a problem. What we want to do is do it right. If there's value proposition, like there's easy stuff like it's more. You're trying to sell filers, you're trying to go after them, where you figure out who needs this data like more. Now you got a value proposition. You don't need everyone. Value proposition. I'm just saying.
So.
Awesome. I was down for the conversation. It's really great. We're going to actually wrap it up. Do you have any final thoughts, Robert? Where do we find out more about POWA?
Yeah, we're on the web, https://powa.me. Don't be me, power me, power me.
Follow me.
Okay. Don't be afraid to ask your dealer if they have an app. So if you want to help me out, make sure you say, well, where's your app? Next time you're getting a service and they say, well, you need to call and make an appointment. Well, I really should be doing this on my app. But
Yeah.
yes,
You got to power me.
that's right. But thank you for having me.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And thank you all for coming to Crypto Cafe Day 3. I hope to see you tomorrow at Durfee. Our CEO, Rob Comstorff, is going to talk about a product that we are developing called Meringue, which is dynamic equity on a blockchain. If you are not on our mailing list, I invite you to sign up right here behind me. And let's see. Who can answer a question, a little quiz? Just simply, give me one use case for blockchain for our auto industry. Somebody for a t-shirt. Yeah. Oh. Oh, cool. I didn't know that about Target. Thank you. So you get a t-shirt. And so does anybody else.
Do I get a t-shirt?
Yeah, you get a t-shirt. Our schedule is on the table behind us. Thank you again for coming. And please stick around if you want to continue the conversation question.
Robert, as a board retiree, I understand completely the inertia